Hello, everybody. This is Anthony Brogdon. I'm coming at you again today. Woo-wee. And you know, when I do is I'm trying to cover the gambit, just a little bit of everything in terms of Black history. Some good, some bad, but at the end of the day, you're going to learn something when you watch my videos. I make it short, sweet, concise. I got a good one today, too. But before that, just take 30 seconds, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, hit the notifications button, tell some other people about strong inspirations. I got a book out. It's titled Black Business Book. It's over 200 facts on Black history. And one of the facts that we cover, not one, but it's a whole chapter on how slaves gained their freedom, which is kind of what we're going to talk about today. And then, I have the documentary, Business in the Black. Both of them are on my website, businessintheblack.net, but they're also on Amazon. The documentary is streaming on Amazon. The book is on Amazon. It's a hard copy. It's an electronic digital copy. Slaves, we got our freedom. We fled. But it wasn't even enough to flee to the north. You might even had to go further. You had to go to Canada. So my guest is going to talk about that because it's amazing. Now, you might know, you might not know, I'm actually based out of Detroit. And so Canada, Windsor is right across the Detroit River. The Detroit River from Canada might be at most 2 miles distance, 2 miles. It's too long to swim across and the currents are too strong. And so that kind of leads into my guess, because we had to, the slaves had to get to Canada to make them even more free than it was when they were in the North. So would you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself? And then I got a question or two.
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak today. I'm really happy to be here. My name is Dr. Laureen Lenny, and I am the assistant curator at the Amherstburg Freedom Museum. We are a museum that celebrates the contributions of Black Canadians and talks about the Underground Railroad in Essex County, but beyond as well. We don't just limit it to that, but we're a museum in Amherstburg, Ontario, and I have my PhD in Black Canadian history. My focus was organizational work in Essex County, a little bit beyond that as well, but the main focus is Essex County. And so I'm thrilled that I get to share what I love and what I'm passionate about every single day at the museum. So thank you for having me.
That's incredible. And you got your doctorate, so I know you know what you're talking.
Yeah.
You had to write a paper
passion.
on it.
It is a passion of mine.
That's incredible. Okay, so Detroit, can you take me back? The slaves got to Detroit, and then why did they have to go to Canada?
So there are a lot of factors that played into why freedom seekers came to Canada. It's kind of a push-pull in terms of factors for Canada, but also US. So things that were pulling people from the US were things like the Act to Limit Slavery from 1793. We had slavery in Canada as well, which I think is surprising to a lot of people. We had slavery until 1834, but 1793 with the Act to Limit Slavery, that it didn't end slavery, but it stopped the introduction of enslaved persons into Upper Canada. What it stated was, if you were born before 1793, you would remain enslaved for the rest of your life. But if you were born after that law, you would be free upon your 25th birthday, and your children would also be free. But again, there were limitations with that law. It wasn't until August 1st, 1834 that slavery was officially abolished in Canada. But that law also had some limitations as well, because it freed only people the age of 6 and under. Everyone else remained indentured for 4 to 6 years after that. So, but one important thing to remember is, despite the limitations, it did introduce Canada as free soil. So if you were an African American coming to Canada, once you touched Canadian soil, you were free. Additional factors in terms of Canadian history, the War of 1812. That was a huge moment because if you can imagine, African-American soldiers are seeing free Black militiamen fighting for Upper Canada, and they're free in this country. They're seeing this and then begin to question their own lives and what they've been told, because what they're seeing, these free Black men, is the complete opposite of the lives that they've lived, because it's possible they assume that because of the way they've been raised and indoctrinated, that they were to be enslaved for the rest of their life, but this offered an alternative. And so word started to spread in terms of free Black people being in Canada. And that was what really caused the first wave of Underground Railroad freedom seekers to come into Canada. Around 1817 to 1822 was the big first wave. And then a final factor deals with American history, the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. That law was very oppressive. It made it unsafe for anyone of African descent because bounty hunters didn't really distinguish between who was free and who was enslaved. So they would go into free northern states, and that law allowed them to retrieve anyone, whether you were free or not.
Mm.
You could be retrieved and brought back into slavery. So
Oh
it made
man.
it very unsafe for anyone of African descent to remain in the US. So that's why so many people came in. So there's a push-pull
I got
aspects
you.
to why.
I got you. Let's go back one step. When did Canada get slavery? When would they say the first slaves arrived in Canada? In
Oh,
America, we
slavery.
have 1619. Does Canada have a number, a year?
Slavery has existed in Canada for centuries. I'd say 200 years we've had slavery in Canada. And it's often a part of our history that people are really unaware of. I think it's a common thing for people to look to the United States to try and tell our own story, but Canada had a history as well. And it's also important to recognize that our history is not perfect. We have some awful moments, and slavery is one of them. And I think it's important that people recognize that.
Was Canadian slavery like American slavery? Were they picking cotton, or was it just servitude?
So it was more than just servitude. The climate in Canada wasn't the same as the United States. Of course, it's a bit colder here, but there were different crops like tobacco crops that were grown here. So there, and also because we're so close to the waterfront, fisheries as well. So it wouldn't have just been working in the house. It would have also been performing labor. And I often get asked that question: is it the same as what it would be in the U.S.? And I always point to an artifact that we have in our exhibit, and it is an iron ring. And that iron ring was embedded in a tree on the property of a man named Matthew Elliott. He was a military figure who is, unfortunately, he's only celebrated for his military contributions. He's not really recognized as an enslaver, except if you come to the museum where we tell you about it.
Sure,
But that
sure.
ring was embedded in a tree on his property, and that was used to tie up his enslaved people and to punish them, to whip them for likely doing nothing wrong at all. So that is a clear example that I always point to people when they
Sure.
ask what's the difference between, because
Okay.
brutality and slavery existed in Canada as well.
Now, did Canada slaves happen like American slaves? For lack of a better word, imported, on ships like they were here in America? Or
So not to the same extent. There's often a way to decipher between the two. The US was a slave society where Canada was a society with slaves. So the amounts were not as high as the United States, but oftentimes it would have been military conquests that people would have attained an enslaved person through sale as well. I mean, one example, Mary Joseph Angelique, she was in Montreal and she began her life in Portugal. And then she ended up in the United States. And then she was sold to a Canadian enslaver in Montreal or in the United States, and then went to Montreal. So oftentimes it would have been going to, I mean, slavery was so massive in the United States, and Canada is so close that I think it would be impossible for us not to be impacted by it. So enslavers would go to the United States and purchase them as well.
yeah, that
So
was going to be my next question. Did they come over here to actually, go to the auctions down south? Because it wasn't happening in Michigan, I suspect, right?
I'm not sure about in Michigan, but slavery did exist in the North as well. So there were opportunities in the North to purchase an enslaved person. Um, I don't know of any examples that went way down south, but certainly in the North and the upper South, they certainly would have purchased people there.
Wow. So Canada had slavery, and what year did you say they abolished it
In
completely?
1834 was when it was abolished. But
So
again,
31 years before America did.
exactly, exactly, which made Canada such an appealing location to American freedom seekers because we were so close. We spoke English, so there was not the worry of trying to learn the language. And also, in terms of transferring your life, I mean, farming is a very big thing in Essex County. There's a lot of rural areas, and so transferring your life to use skills that you had acquired. I mean, as oppressive as enslavement was, you did gain skills and you
Sure,
could transfer those to your life in freedom, which is
sure,
what a lot of people did.
sure.
So that's why what made Canada such an ideal place, because you could touch Canadian soil. It was such a close location, and all the other factors I'd mentioned just a moment ago.
I guess my next question is, how did the word get out? I've always wondered that. I mean, it wasn't understandably internets and things like that. How did people in America know about Canada? How do you
Well,
think that word got out?
yeah. So when you, if you can, I mean, you think about a person who is enslaved and in their entire life, they've been told that they are here to serve one purpose, to be the property, because you were seen as property. You weren't seen as an actual human being. You were seen
Sure,
as a piece of property
sure.
that was put on this earth to serve an enslaver. And so it was, I can assume that it would be very difficult to challenge that thought when that's what you've been indoctrinated with your whole life.
Sure.
And so I think one really huge factor was, as I mentioned, the War of 1812. When you're fighting against another country and you see that the way that they operate and the lives of Black people in their country is much different from what your own is, then that's really going to make you question what you think you know. I mean, your entire life you've been told, oh well, don't escape to Canada, it's too cold, you'll die instantly because you won't be able to survive the weather. But you go there and you see that there's people living their life in freedom and they're surviving. That's, I think, something that makes anyone question
Oh, okay.
question their life.
Let's go back over this just shortly. The War 1812 was what? Who fought the war? And
So it was the British and the United States, and so I believe it was over territory,
okay,
and Canada was part of that. And being so close to the United States, Canada and the United States clashed during that, and so there were opportunities for African Americans to come into Canada with raids and trying to take over land and property that allowed them to see the lives of Black Canadians living in this country and fighting for their country as well. So it wasn't just the fact that they were free, but the fact that they were given the right to fight for their country. I
so
think was
so Canada was helping America fight the British
so. Canada, yes, Canada as a British colony, we fought with the British to
against America.
against the United States. Yes.
And then there were Black people in Canada that was fighting with the British against America.
Exactly. Exactly. The same thing happened with the American Revolution. There were Black soldiers who were promised, if you come and fight for the British, we will not only offer you freedom, but we'll give you land. Now, the thing to remember, though, is that the deal was not as perfect as it might appear. It wasn't this perfect package. The British actually, I mean, of course, we know the British lost because America gained its
Yeah,
independence,
sure.
but once the war was over, the British either in many instances either gave the poorest quality of land or no land at all to people who they'd promised to. And there were even examples of people who were re-enslaved once they came into Canada. So
Okay,
they were they were enslaved in the US, they fought for the British, were promised their freedom, brought to Canada, and then re-enslaved.
I
So
got
that's
you.
just another example of Canada's treatment of Black Canadians in this country who have
I got you.
served.
So now what? So this might be funny then. So what happens is I'm a black guy here in America fighting against the British. I'm a black guy in Canada fighting for the British. And then all of a sudden, one day we sit next to each other because maybe we got a chance to say, hey, you a black guy fighting over there, and we get a chance to talk.
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
how that happened.
Yeah. Or even just the visual of seeing a black man who is fighting for their country, as opposed to being forced, I would assume, in the terms of African Americans who are fighting.
So
So
if I was a black guy in America and I see a black guy in Canada for the British, I might not shoot at him.
that's a possibility. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I
I'm
mean,
shooting
I
at the
can't,
other guy.
yeah, I can't put myself in their shoes, but
Right,
absolutely, that is certainly a possibility that you would see someone who looks like yourself, but they
right.
have a different story than your own.
Yeah, that's amazing. So now, how did people from the United States, the slaves from the United States, get to Canada? I mean, did they get on a little boat, or because it's like I say, it's a little river?
Yeah, so there's a lot of ways that people did come over. The main way was swimming with the waterfront. Amherstburg, it's at one of the narrowest points in the Detroit River. So it's actually it's an ideal location. It was one of the primary spots for people to come into Canada. You could also walk across the ice in the wintertime, which
Yeah, I remember hearing
I
those
would,
stories. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
I would assume that either swimming or walking across frozen ice would have been an absolutely terrifying experience, because I mean the ice could break at any moment, but if you're swimming across, this is a possibility that this is the first instant that you're coming across a body of water like this swimming, because a barrier under enslavement was preventing people from learning how to swim because they didn't want them to be able to escape.
Okay,
So I guess you would have to grab something that could help you float across the river, that would help you, like a log of some sort. There was also the option of taking a ferry, which kind of brings me to a connection between Windsor and Detroit. There
sure.
was a ferry, it was a steamship owned by George de Baptist. It was called the T. Whitney, and he purchased it. He was an African American, very wealthy, and he purchased this ship. But the ironic part about it was that at that time, a black man could not captain his own ship. So he had to hire a white man to help him transport freedom seekers into Windsor from Detroit. So there's several ways that people came across. Not everybody had the luxury of hiring a ferry to bring you across. So in most cases, it would have been swimming across.
Wow. So that
Yeah,
was a dangerous move too.
it would have been terrifying. I mean, the Detroit River is the current is not as strong as it was before.
Okay.
Uh, I mean, the water was much shallower at the time, and so the current wasn't as strong
Oh,
then.
is that
Um,
right?
Once it
Okay.
was dredged, the current became much stronger and deeper. But this, I don't want to paint this ideal picture that just because the water might have been a little shallower and the current wasn't as strong, that it wasn't absolutely terrifying. Like, I think we have to recognize the sacrifice that people were willing to make to get to freedom in Canada, because they were trying to get away from a life of oppression and injustice and absolute
Sure,
terror.
sure,
So
sure.
they were willing to risk anything.
Were bounty hunters allowed to come into Canada to look for their slaves?
That's a great question. So that is, I always, when I give tours at the museum, I always try to tell people about Canadian myths. A lot of times people think once a freedom seeker touched Canadian soil, they were 100% safe, but that's not the case at all. You were I'm sure on a daily basis, worried that a bounty hunter would come into Canada, because we were so close in terms of Essex County. The river's right there, and it's an access point for bounty hunters to come across. And so there's that terror that they could come at any point, because, as you mentioned, it's not really that far of a distance to come
Sure,
across.
sure.
There's examples as well that talk about, about a freedom seeker coming into this country and trying to be retrieved. I mean, if you think about Solomon Mosby, he's a case from the Niagara region, which is closer to Toronto for anyone not familiar with the area. That case was, I believe, 1837, and his enslaver came into Canada trying to find him, and he ended up applying the Fugitive Offenders Act, which stated that if you committed a crime, say, for example, you stole a horse in Kentucky, or you committed a murder, you killed a person who was trying to capture you and bring you back in Kentucky, your enslaver could come into Canada and say, he committed this crime in Kentucky. He needs to be brought back to Kentucky to face trial. And so that's what happened to Solomon Mosby, because he did steal a horse. And so his enslaver wanted to bring him back so he could face trial. Now, what ended up happening was an amazing movement, because the local Black community came together and they actually prevented his retrieval. They were actually about to put him onto a boat, and they came together and they basically, I don't know if the word protest is the correct word, but they came together and prevented them from bringing him back. And it wasn't just about Solomon Mosby. It was a clear example of, if he's allowed to be brought back, maybe he didn't even steal a horse and he's just being accused.
Yeah,
What's to prevent
sure.
this from happening to me? And
Sure.
so it wasn't just about Solomon Mosby. It was about protecting themselves from what could happen to them in the future,
Sure.
because accusations from an enslaver, I mean, that would speak a lot more than the
Sure.
protest of an enslaved or freedom seeker saying, no,
Sure.
this is not true.
Sure.
And even on a more local example in Essex County, we recently had, we started this year, I started actually it's 2021 now. So 2020, I started doing these virtual Facebook Live presentations where I have an expert come in and talk about a specific aspect of Black history. And our first guest speaker talked about the Underground Railroad in Canada, but also Mexico. And she used a local example to talk about a man named Nelson Hackett. And he actually was a victim of the law that I just mentioned, where he was from Arkansas and he stole a horse on his way in. And so his enslaver went back to Arkansas after the Canadian government refused his request to bring Nelson back. He went back to Arkansas and said, he stole this horse. He's my property. He needs to come back and he needs to face trial here. And so tragically, he's an awful story where he actually was brought back to the United States.
Wow.
So that's a tragic story that happened to
Sure.
him. And if
Sure.
anyone did want to learn more about Nelson Hackett and the presentations that we do, they're available on our Facebook page, our
Sure. Sure.
website, amherstburgfreedom.org,
Sure.
and our YouTube page as well. You can
Sure.
watch presentations like that, and other subjects as well in terms of Black Canadian
Sure.
history.
Now, I know you talk about coming from Detroit. Do you know how they, Canada is, also borders United States up in further northern areas, like you said, New York, or I guess out west.
Yes.
Is that similar circumstance? It was free over there, and if the slaves got there from, I don't know what, Seattle, Washington, or the state of Washington, or something like that, is that the same thing?
So in Black Canadian history, there are so many different stories to tell. You'd even mentioned other areas outside of Ontario. There's Black history throughout Canada. I mean, I'd mentioned already with the American Revolution, with the Black Loyalists coming into Canada, that is, in addition to the Underground Railroad, that is a main way that African Americans did come into Canada. With other provinces like Alberta and Saskatchewan, there's the Oklahoma migration of the early 1900s, the gold rush for BC. So there's so many different ways to tell Black Canadian history in Canada, because there's so many entry points. In terms of Ontario, we do have Black Loyalists as well who fought in the American Revolution. A main way, though, is the Underground Railroad. And further
Okay.
along the line, there were Caribbean communities that came through as well, and African descended people that came into Canada from Africa as well. So there is, I think you raise an important point. It's
Sure.
important to look at Black history is not just one story.
Sure.
There's different
Sure.
communities that exist: the African community, the Caribbean community, the Underground Railroad descendants as well. But in terms of other places in Ontario, a main way that they did come in was the Underground Railroad.
Sure.
I mean, people like Harriet Tubman, she came in through the St. Catharines area, and she
Where's that?
established
Where's that? Hold on. Where's St. Catharines
St.
located?
Catharines. So it's closer to Toronto than, I'm trying to use a popular spot that people might be aware of. Toronto is
Yeah.
probably about 4.5 hours away from here.
Yes.
St. Catharines is fairly close to there. So she established herself Salem Baptist Church, which actually just recently got an amazing grant that's going to help them restore their church.
Really?
But Josiah Henson, he came through the Niagara region as well. He also has connections in Amherstburg too. He fought in the the Upper Canada Rebellion as well. So he was a military figure here, and he went on to establish the Don settlement. So there is so many entry points in terms of Black
Yeah,
Canadian
sure,
history.
sure.
And it's not always the same story. There's different reasons why people entered as well.
Did when the Africans, when the enslaved people, got to, let's say, your area, Amherstburg, what have you, did they develop a town or a community of their own, and did it have a name to it or something like that?
That's an excellent question. So I've always viewed it as two forms of settlement. There were more independent settlements, and then there were more integrated settlements. So an integrated settlement, I would consider Amherstburg to be one of those, where it would be Black freedom seekers coming into I don't want to say white society, but
Sure, sure,
a society that was dominated by white people.
sure,
They
sure.
came in and established themselves there. But there were also independent Black settlements that were established throughout Ontario. The Refugee Home Society, Mary and Henry Bibb, they played a huge role in the operation of that settlement. That area was in Windsor, Puce. So just basically places that form Essex County. The Refugee Home Society was part of that. Also,
Sure.
the Buxton settlement. That was a huge place for people to go. The Reverend
Sure.
William King, he helped establish that. The Don settlement, which is in Dresden. So those are three key Black settlements that
I
were
got you.
specific to Black life
I
and
got you.
having Black settlers living there. Whereas, as I said, there were integrated societies like Amherstburg. Chatham as well was also an integrated area as well too. So there's
Sure, I
different
got you.
ways that people did settle here.
I got you. Is there a question that I haven't asked you that you said you need to ask this question or something as we come to a close?
Well, I would just like to point out that there are so many important aspects of Black Canadian history. I mean, the Underground Railroad didn't stop once people came into Canada. They continued their lives. They established themselves as trailblazers in this community. People like Mary Ann Shadd, she was the very first Black woman to create a newspaper, publish a newspaper in all of North America. Henry and Mary Bibb, they published the very first Black newspaper in Ontario. To other trailblazers like Dallas Davis, he was the third Black lawyer in Canada and the first person appointed to King's Council in terms of Black Canadians and all of the British Empire. So what I'm trying to point out is that there were people, trailblazers that came into Canada who challenged the racism and discrimination that existed in this country. We had things like segregation here in terms of education, and we had a civil rights movement here as well that involved figures like the ones I just mentioned, others who challenged segregated education.
Really?
So I think it's really important that we challenge what we think we know, because Canada has this image of being this perfect promised land,
Yeah,
but it's
sure.
much more complicated than that.
Sure,
We
sure,
need to realize that things weren't perfect once people came into Canada.
sure.
And one other thing I wanted to do was just shout out to two books that I think are really
Oh
important
yeah,
that I
please
think
do. Please do.
people should
Yes.
read. The first one is called A Fluid Frontier. This book is, I think it's my favorite book. It's
Okay.
fantastic. And it's relevant to both of us because it talks about the borderland. So Detroit and Windsor and Essex
Okay.
County's connections to each other. So I really
Right.
recommend that one.
Right.
And then another one, this is a forthcoming book. This hasn't come out yet, but it's called Our Own Two Hands. It's by Irene Moore Davis, and it talks about Windsor's contributions and their Black community there. This is
Okay.
a phenomenal book. So when it does come out, I highly recommend that people take a look at it. So you'll be
Okay.
able to learn more in addition to what I've said here too.
Now, give us a couple websites or something like that to your organization, what have you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. You're reading my mind. So we are on social media. I run our social media pages on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and I post every day about Black Canadian history. On our Facebook page, I post a little bit about African American history as well, so it's a little
Sure.
bit broader. So Amherstburg Freedom is our Facebook page. Aberg Freedom is our Twitter and our Instagram page.
Abrick.
Aberg, so
Aberg.
Aburg,
Okay.
and then Freedom. is our tags, and then our website as well. If you go there, you'll actually be able to see some family histories that I write. I choose a local Black family in Essex County every month to write about, and I think I've written like 33 of them now. But you can learn more about the contributions of local figures, because I think oftentimes in terms of Black history, people get overshadowed by larger names like Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman. So I
Sure,
think it's important to narrow in onto local figures as well. So
sure.
you can learn about the different families that exist in Essex County as well too. And we do have a YouTube page too. So
Okay. What's the
yeah.
YouTube page called?
So if you just type in Amherstburg Freedom Museum, it'll pop right up.
Everything.
And our website as well is amherstburgfreedom.org.
Okay. Is there a last question? Is there some ceremony, celebration, Black history in Canada?
Yes, I'm so glad you asked that. So we do have Emancipation Day that is on August 1st every year. And usually outside of the pandemic, we host an in-person event, which celebrates the abolition of slavery in Canada.
And August 1st is that day?
Yes, August 1st. Yeah. So the event, it depends on which Friday it falls
Sure.
on before the event, before the actual date. So we share information about it on our social media channels if people are interested, once it's safe to come out again.
Yes.
But if things don't change, we'll have to do something virtually.
Sure. Yeah. So again, slavery ended on August 1st,
Yes.
1834.
34.
I got you.
Yes. Yeah.
Boy, oh boy, I tell you, gave me a lot to think about. I used to come to Canada quite often, being so close, but, can't do it now.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you taking time out to share this information with us. Everybody, I tell you, this is what we do on Strong Inspirations. We give it to you strong. It comes at you from all angles, internationally, locally, nationally, what have you. Again, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, hit the notifications button so you know when I got a new video up, and I do at least 2, 3 each week. Tell somebody about us. Get your copy of my book. Get your copy and watch my movie. Thank you so very much. Hey, stay safe, stay strong, stay doing what you're doing. We appreciate you. And everybody, we out. Bye-bye.